Our third presentation this evening is our State Representative, Jeremy Moss, is here to tell us about the things that are going on in Lansing regarding an issue that's coming up later on in our meeting, which is the oil well drilling that is being attempted in Southfield, and we're doing everything we can to make it not happen. Mr. Moss, if you will.
Thank you, Council President, Council, Administration, and Mayor. Two tough acts to follow, certainly, and mine is not as upbeat as the previous presentations. But I did want to talk a little bit ahead of the Council's vote tonight on the new ordinance regarding oil and gas drilling and some restrictions that the city's putting in place on that. There's been a flurry of activity just in the last week and a half in Lansing that I wanted to make sure that not only Council and the Mayor and our attorney is updated on, but residents of our community as well. First and foremost, I do want to acknowledge that this council and this mayor, and this is more for the residents that are listening, has been on top of this issue every single step of the way. And they deserve an applause for that. I first got the call really at the beginning of the process when then Mayor Fracassi alerted me to this issue. I didn't run for state rep thinking that I would be the expert on oil and gas drilling, but lo and behold, that's what's fallen into my lap. But then Mayor Fracassi was on top of this issue. The baton was picked up by Mayor Siver, who has been all over everywhere talking about the dangers of this type of activity in our community, and this council as a whole has been forward thinking, and I think a lot of the product of that forward thinking is going to be approved tonight with this ordinance. So I thank you for keeping me on top of the issue and our residents as well. Let's go back to on the 12th of April. The governor had previously appointed, and this will come back to the oil and gas drilling issue, but diverting the attention a bit with another issue the DEQ is dealing with, the governor appointed the Flint Water Advisory Task Force. It was a bipartisan group led by a Democratic co-chair and a Republican co-chair, a former Republican state Senate leader and a former Democratic state legislator, to figure out what went wrong with Flint. What are some of the solutions that can happen? What are some of the legislative policy initiatives that need to take place? What are some of the good things we can actually learn from this catastrophic health crisis in Flint? And what are the next steps moving forward? That task force issued a lengthy report, up and down, criticizing what are some of the decisions that were made at all levels of government, but in particular focused on the Department of Environmental Quality and some of the things that they did that made them complicit to what led to the crisis in Flint. This task force presented the report on the 12th of April before a joint Senate committee that was focused on the health crisis going on in Flint. During this testimony, they outlined a culture within the DEQ that promotes environmental injustice, and specifically cited by Dr. Lawrence Reynolds, who is a part of this task force, was the oil drilling in Southfield as an environmental injustice that is part of the culture of the Department of Environmental Quality. So, for anybody who criticizes drawing the comparison of what's going on here in Southfield to what's going on in Flint, it's not just us drawing that comparison. The governor's appointed Flint Advisory Task Force draws that comparison of environmental injustice here in our own community. Then a week later, on the 19th, the DEQ announced this corrosive brine leak at 10 Mile and Lassa Road, and I know that is something that the mayor has been on top of and will speak more to. Also on the 19th, I got notice from my office that the Department of Environmental Quality, specifically Hal Fitch, who is the gentleman who he's the head of the Oil and Gas Division and conducted the public hearing. He was going to make a presentation on oil and gas drilling and the protocols that the state regulates at the Energy Policy Committee early on Wednesday morning, the 20th, just last Wednesday. I attended that committee hearing where he said oil drilling is safe, and oil drilling, there are no issues, and they haven't had any issues in residential areas. All the while, other DEQ officials are scrambling in Southfield to clean up this brine leak in our community. So a huge disconnect between the department's policies and what's going on in our own community. As I have previously introduced legislation, House Bill 5258, which creates setbacks of 2,000 feet for any oil and gas drilling activity between that and a residential unit, also forces the DEQ to hold a public hearing in the community in which a permit is being considered, and also requires the DEQ to follow any local ordinances that, like the ones that are being passed tonight, or like the lawful moratorium that the city has currently. There was discussion among some of my colleagues on this committee with the DEQ. The DEQ takes its current stance, which obviously the city is fighting, that it is not bound to respect any local laws. You know, the local laws can stand on their own, but we're not going to enforce them. So two of my colleagues, Representative Mike Weber, who's a Republican from Rochester Hills, and Representative Peter Lucido, who's a Republican from Shelby Township, have also faced this issue in their community and are on our side, joining our fight. This is a nonpartisan issue because the health implications don't matter whether you're a Democrat or Republican. We're all facing them together. So Representatives Weber and Lucido sit on this Energy Policy Committee. Unfortunately, I do not, and really grilled the DEQ. As a result, Representative Lucido and I together introduced a new House Bill 5582, and that would just really empower communities to just strictly ban oil and gas from being a permit from being issued in their community. Right now, as our attorney knows, you cannot zone out an activity within our community. We've introduced legislation that creates an exception for oil and gas drilling because of the problems that are happening in our own community and elsewhere that would allow this community to simply zone away any oil and gas development in our community. So that bill, along with numerous pieces of legislation that Representative Lucido has introduced, the previous House bill that I've introduced, all sit before the Energy Policy Committee. And this is where I need your help. I need the help of our residents here. The Energy Policy Committee is chaired by House Majority Floor Leader Eric Nesbitt, Nesbitt. He decides what comes on the agenda. We would love for all of the oil and gas related legislation that we've introduced to be heard, to have a hearing on it, to allow the residents in our community, to allow our hardworking officials to talk about what it's like to live with this in our own community. His number to his office, which I implore all Southfield residents to call and demand a hearing on our two House bills, and I'll repeat those numbers in a second. His phone number to his office is toll-free 800-577-6212, or you can reach him directly in Lansing, and I'll repeat these numbers, at 517-373-0839. Again, that's a toll-free number of 800-577-6212, or you can reach him directly in his Lansing office at 517-373-0839. That's Representative Eric Nesbitt, who chairs the House Energy Policy Committee. And we're asking for movement on my legislation, which is House Bills 5258 and 5582, and the legislation that Representative Lucido has introduced. One final point that I do want to make. The poorest named department in Lansing is the Department of Environmental Quality because they don't care about environmental quality. And this is what is so remarkable. The city right now, as many of us know, are appealing the decision that trampled over our local control by the department to issue the permit for drilling at 9 Mile and Evergreen. The person who made that decision is Hal Fitch. The person who will hear the appeal on that decision is Hal Fitch. Anybody who knows how anything would work would say, why would you allow the person to hear the appeal be the same person who issued the decision to begin with? Another remarkable way that the Department of Environmental Quality is set up is they are partly funded in part by the taxes that are placed upon the oil and gas drilling companies as they do, continue to drill throughout our state. Their economic model is predicated upon issuing these drilling permits. This is a case of the fox guarding the henhouse. And, it takes communities like ours and like the impassioned residents who have been on top of this issue in the orange shirts and other shirts behind me that have really put pressure on and really exposed how absurd this process is in Lansing. And I want to thank them as well for advocating for our community. So that's the report I wanted to bring to the council. So residents, rest assured, I'm on top of this in Lansing. Your council and your mayor is on top of this, and the residents aren't going to let up either. And we're all in this together really to expose what even the Flint Water Advisory Task Force, appointed by Governor Snyder himself, calls an environmental injustice in our community.
Thank you very much. One question that I have is, as this goes on, are there more people jumping on the train?
I think our community has emboldened people to jump on the train. I haven't heard of any new communities, but I have had really a good experience in working with legislative partners like Pete Lucido and Mike Weber, along with my Democratic colleagues. And my Democratic colleagues, I think, understand the environmental implications, and our Republican colleagues are starting to understand it as it's happening in their own backyard, that it is, as our mayor says, it is completely inappropriate to drill for oil in a residentially zoned area. And, Representative Lucido and I have taken that issue and are pushing for it as far as we can push it. And we're slowly but surely really shining a light on the operations of the Department of Environmental Quality.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you.
And this is a precursor of what's going to happen later on in the agenda.